Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guest today is Tony Hubbard, Government Cybersecurity Lead at KPMG. Tony, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you.
So to begin with, we're talking cyber here. I wanted to kind of get the whole landscape of things. So where is cyber today in the realm of the federal sphere and also the industry sphere?
I think it depends on kind of your perspective, if you're a glass half full or glass half empty.
Sure.
So I tend to be the glass half full. So if you look at it from that perspective, there certainly continues to be breaches and vulnerabilities that are coming out all the time, and there's a lot of new challenges that are facing government organizations from a cyber perspective, and that's going to continue. But the glass half full looks at the opportunities for both government and industry to support those efforts, and notably, just we'll talk about it as we go along. But one example that jumps out is around process automation. Mm-hmm. There are so many areas from a cybersecurity industry that can be automated, whether you're looking at things such as audit trail review, account management, threat management, threat intelligence analysis and management. A lot of those processes, they're very manual right now. They require a lot of research by analysts, and any of those processes that are very manual oriented, require a lot of analysis, can be automated. And so I'm excited about that opportunity to automate more of these processes, because there's no question there's not enough cybersecurity professionals to deal with the challenges. So as an industry, we're going to have to automate more processes so that we can free up our cybersecurity professionals to focus on the more challenging tasks. So again, I think it's a balance depending on your perspective. You could look at it, if your glass half empty, that the sky is falling and we're never going to get out of this dynamic that we have. But like I said, from a glass half full perspective, I think there's a lot of potential and opportunity.
I mean, it does have that dynamic where everything's changing, right? So you're never going to be there. You're always going to be catching up, right? And so is government in a position right now where it feels okay with things, or is it just kind of behind a little bit? Is it prepared?
You're right. There's certainly the dynamic that you're never going to declare success. You're never going to say we've won. That's just not how this industry is going to ever. And you could argue the same thing about the broader technology world. You're always going to feel like we can do something better. We can do something different. We can modernize our systems. And certainly from a cyber perspective, that's the case. And so, again, it's going to be a work in process. I think the best thing that organizations can do is, try not to get too wrapped around the axle from the complexity of a cybersecurity issue. So you look at a lot of the breaches that are happening, and in some cases, they are very sophisticated attacks that are highly technical, but overwhelmingly, in the majority of the cases where there's a breach, these are not highly technical issues. Over 90% of breaches in malware still occur because somebody opened up an email, clicked on a link, or went to a website they weren't familiar with and introduced malware into the environment. That's not a complex situation. And then if you look at the hygiene element, making sure that your systems are patched, making sure that you've got good strong passwords on your devices. It's certainly easier said than done, but those are not complex solutions. Right. And that's really, I think, where organizations need to continue to focus, because it's sort of like having, you go to bed at night, you lock your doors, and hopefully if somebody comes trying to get into your house and your doors are locked, everything's locked up tight, they're going to go find another place. So you're not necessarily going to prevent all breaches. If somebody really wants to get into your environment, they're most likely going to do reconnaissance and surveillance, and they're going to figure out a way to eventually get in. However, if you're limiting the risk and the attack surface such that it just makes it that much harder for them, they very well may go onto another entity or another target. So I think that's. So again, it's definitely a work in process, but as I said before, I definitely see a lot of potential.
You talked about that person clicking on malware, and obviously the human part is the weakest link of everything. So how do you minimize that risk within your organization and within government when the human nature is to be lazy, right? You want to make your password 1212 because that's the easy part to do, right? So how do you kind of keep that that urgency in things to make sure that people aren't being lazy?
So interesting, it gets back to this concept of hygiene again, in
Yeah.
terms of, we talked about some of the technical processes around hygiene is, patching your systems, making sure there's passwords on devices, no missing passwords, things like that. But one of the other key elements of good cyber hygiene is the security awareness and training element. As I mentioned before, there's significant amount of vulnerabilities now are continuing to occur because somebody woke up in the morning, maybe didn't have their coffee, and they get an email in their box, and it's like, oh, that looks legitimate, I'll click on that link.
Yeah.
And that's more of a training and awareness issue. And a lot of organizations, all of us have to sit down and do our annual training and awareness, and it's like, oh gosh, I got to do that again. But that continued training and awareness is an important element of it. And so, I think continuing that kind of focus and just continuing the training and awareness and understanding that the part of the training and awareness is making sure that the end users know that they're part of the security challenge and part of the solution, meaning that it's not just the CIO's job, it's not just the CISO's job. If you're an end user, you are part of the security ecosystem. You're interacting with the internet, you're interacting with the world, you're interacting with email, and so you're putting yourself in a position where you could bring vulnerabilities into the environment. So that concept of it's everybody's job is part of the training and awareness that's critical.
What kind of threats are you seeing right now? Is there anything that's new that's kind of hitting the landscape right now, or is it just the same old malware and spyware that's always been an issue, just in different forms?
No, there's certainly, if you look at the concept of zero-day vulnerabilities, the vulnerabilities that we don't know about today, but we'll find out about shortly. There's so many. As I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of vulnerabilities and malware that are very basic, but certainly when you get into more sophisticated adversaries, foreign nation states, some of these attacks are very sophisticated, and that's where it gets into the automation angle, where there's no way our government organizations, as we talked about before, can keep up with this. So because of the significance and the evolving attacks and the vulnerabilities, that's where this automation angle has to play in. So to give you an example, one of the concepts we like to use is prosilience, proactive cyber resilience, versus being a reactive entity. And this is where you apply some automation techniques into your threat intelligence platform, so that you try techniques such as predictive analytics. So you can go out and look at the vulnerabilities that are out there now that are known about, try to do some predictive analytics around what that could look like, so that you may be able to predict the next zero-day vulnerability. And so I think that's an area, again, where there's a lot of optimism about, from a cybersecurity industry, that we can try to move forward and implement those kind of concepts so that we can hopefully predict the next zero-day attack.
Tough job.
No question.
We're going to take a quick break. My guest today is Tony Hubbard, Government Cybersecurity Lead for KPMG. I'm your moderator, Scott Massioni, on the discussion Federal Insights Cyber, sponsored by KPMG on Federal News Radio, part of Federal News Network.